Thank you, John, and thanks to all the panelists and reactors for brilliantly setting the stage for a conversation about key takeaways and ideas for a path forward. I mean, today we had a comprehensive, open, honest dialogue about an extraordinarily complex issue that is foundational to the health of all. So I'm Mary Naylor. I'm a professor at the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing, where I direct the New Cortland Center for Transitions and Health. This is a research unit that emphasizes producing and promoting use of rigorous evidence to advance equitable care for all, especially disadvantaged groups of at-risk adults and their family caregivers. I also am fortunate to co-chair NAM's Culture, Inclusion, and Equity Action Collaborative with Bill and Sandra, and very pleased to be collaborating with my colleagues John and Reed in the Digital Health Action Collaborative on this important issue. So at the start of today's meeting, we took a look at the big picture of the digital transformation of healthcare and the intersection of equity, specifically with AI health-related tools. From there, our panelists explored in depth how bias can play a role in the development, implementation, and evaluation of these tools. However, we also learned about the promise of AI and how others have implemented AI tools with an equity lens. For example, we gained an appreciation of metrics and techniques that can be applied to address biases and also to understand that equitable care is being delivered. In this final session, we will hear from two reactors who will provide reflections on today's discussion and share their key takeaways. After our reactors provide remarks, we'll engage all meeting participants from the previous sessions in addressing public questions. So now it is my pleasure to introduce the reactors who will speak for approximately 7 or 10 minutes. Lene Mudd, Program Director at the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health in the Division of Extramural Research at the NIH, and Sarah Gurkey, Assistant Professor of Law at Pennsylvania State University, Dickinson Law. Let me turn it first to Lene, who will be followed by Sarah.
Thank you so much. I'm really very honored to be part of the workshop today and get to listen to so many insightful talks and comments from all of the previous speakers. I'm really impressed by all the discussions so far today. And what I'd like to do is just briefly discuss a few major themes that I've heard from all of the talks today, and then discuss a couple of activities going on at the NIH where we're working to address some of these themes, and then open up for more discussion. So in terms of the themes that I've heard today, I think one of the first ones we've talked about is the importance of the quality of the data being used to train these models. And, really kind of going back to my grad school days, thinking about garbage in, garbage out, and the need for us to really assess the quality of those data sets, not only in terms of their representativeness, but also in terms of the types of data that are included and all of the different types of data that might not be in electronic health record data or other publicly available data sets. And I also really appreciated the comments about talking with community members and patients and providers to understand what data types are going to be most useful to implement into these different models that we might develop. Another theme that we heard discussed really revolved around privacy and consent. And I think this is a key issue that, we don't always know what we're consenting to. And, certainly as researchers, we really value data that are reusable, but I'm not positive that research participants always understand what that means. And particularly in the context of AI and ML modeling, what can we do to more ethically consent individuals for their data to be used in these ways? And what are some of the challenges to doing that? What are some of the different issues that might need to be addressed when thinking about privacy and consent in that way? We also heard a lot about the challenges of implementation once models are developed, and kind of the need for ongoing monitoring and continuous process improvement, and really being able to evaluate how well do different algorithms and models fit with different contexts, and how the local context can really drive how well those models work. And then we talked a lot also about the need for transparency and education. So how do we translate these very technological concepts into non-technical language that different individuals can understand? And I'll include myself in that group, not being a data scientist myself, and really learning about all of these, the terminology of AI and ML over the past year or so. How do we do better at translating these concepts to the individuals that are being impacted by these algorithms? And along with that, thinking about the regulatory framework for AI and ML use in healthcare. And I really appreciated the comments and wrote down the quote, "Who has the power?" I think this is a really key concept when we're thinking about AI and health equity. So not only applying AI on individuals, but also giving individuals the power to use AI themselves. And then that really feeds into this last discussion we've been having in this last session, which I think was very rich around how do we work with communities? How do we bring communities to the table, not only, once algorithms have been developed and trying to evaluate them, but really from the get-go to understand the data types, that are going to be needed, the different types of health questions that are interesting to those communities that they want evaluated, having their input in the algorithmic development itself so that we can start to avoid some of the biases that plagued this work. So from the NIH perspective, I'm one of the co-coordinators for the new NIH Common Fund program, Bridge to AI, which will bridge expertise from the AI, biomedical, and behavioral research communities to generate new AI ML ready data sets that are ethically sourced, trustworthy, well-defined, and accessible. That's our goal. Along with generating these new data sets, we are also seeking to develop software and standards to unify these data attributes across different sources and data types, which we've also heard as a challenge, to create automated tools to accelerate the creation of fair data, to provide resources to then disseminate this data, the ethical principles as well, the tools and the best practices that get developed through this program, and to create training materials and activities for skills and workforce development that bridges all of these communities. Bridge to AI is very focused on promoting diversity, equity, inclusion throughout our program. And in fact, we are requiring that all of our applicants submit a plan for enhancing diverse perspectives with their proposals, which should include a summary of strategies to advance the scientific and technical merit through expanded inclusivity in the inclusion not only of researchers and personnel and collaborators, but also institutions that are underrepresented in biomedical research, which could include community organizations as well as inclusivity in terms of the research participants and advisory boards, equitable publication plans, etc. And we'll be carefully evaluating these plans as part of our review and funding decisions for the program. And in addition to Bridge to AI, the NIH also recently launched the AIM Ahead program, which stands for Artificial Intelligence Machine Learning Consortium to Advance Health Equity and Researcher Diversity. And this program is specifically focused on establishing mutually beneficial and coordinated partnerships to increase participation and representation of researchers and communities currently underrepresented in the development of AI ML models and enhance capabilities of this emerging technology, beginning with EHR data, which we've been talking about a lot today. So these are just two examples of NIH's focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion as it relates to AI and biomedical and behavioral research. I'll go ahead and pop a few links about these activities in the chat function for those of you who want more information. But I return to the question that we've been discussing in this last session of how do we create equitable partnerships to address the themes that I pulled out above, and I'll stop my comments there.
Thank you, Lanai. That's a terrific set of reflections, and really welcome hearing more about Bridge to AI, NIH's work, and other programs designed to create and act on principles to support equitable use of this critically important tool. I love the question about who has the power, and I hope we get more into that conversation as we go forward. But now let me turn it to Sarah and look forward to your comments.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to react to the previous really excellent sessions. So my name is Sarah Gurkey, and I'm an assistant professor of law at Penn State Dickinson Law. And my research focuses really on all kind of ethical and legal challenges of artificial intelligence and big data for healthcare and health law in the United States and Europe. And before joining Penn State Dickinson Law, I served as a research fellow in medicine, artificial intelligence, and law at the Petri Flom Center for Health Law Policy, Biotechnology, and Bioethics at Harvard Law School. And before that, I was a general manager of the Institute for German, European, and International Medical Law, Public Health Law, and Bioethics of the Universities of Heidelberg and Mannheim. So first of all, I really would like to say that I'm really delighted to see that the National Academy of Medicine is dedicating itself to this really important topic of culture, inclusion, and equity in digital health. I personally believe that we can talk only about a success story of deploying AI in healthcare if we ensure that AI benefits all of us, including the most vulnerable populations. Unfortunately, at this point, we could do a better job to ensure this. So AI in healthcare has brought with it many new ethical, legal, and also social implications, including issues related to informed consent, bias, safety, transparency, privacy, liability, intellectual property, allocation, surveillance, and also reimbursement. And I have written about all of these topics in different venues, including JAMA, Science, and Nature Medicine. And I believe that we are really just at the beginning of the discussion, and much more work is needed over the next years to really ensure that AI or digital health in general realizes its full potential. So I personally wish for a future world in which technology reduces existing disparities in health rather than augment them. And AI is really rapidly entering healthcare. So for example, the FDA has already cleared or approved over 160 AI-based medical devices. And these are just a fraction of all AI-based products currently available on the US market, because not all AI-based products are considered medical devices and are subject to FDA regulation. And in the context of health and research, it's really expected that AI will be increasingly applied in 4 areas: clinical application, patient consumer use, research and development process, such as we heard today by Professor Might with Medicanren, and also workflow optimization. But as we have seen at the same time, AI also raises all these ethical and legal and social challenges. And Professor Gassini gave us today a really excellent overview of the risks of AI tools, especially that privacy is really a big concern. So for example, there is this problem of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, and its reliance on de-identification as a privacy strategy. So under HIPAA, de-identified health information can be shared freely for research and commercial purposes, but this may not adequately protect the privacy of patients because of the possibility of data triangulation. So that to re-identify data sought to be de-identified under the statute through the combination of multiple data sets. And as we also have heard today from Dr. Bembenek and Varun Masoor and Dr. Dankwa Marlin, one major issue is also bias. And the slogan garbage in, garbage out applies to health AI. And of course, the better the training data is, the better the AI will perform. But if health AIs are trained on biased data, existing disparities in health may be augmented rather than reduced. And so, for example, the scenario could be that a Black patient's aquilentigenous melanoma, which is the most common type of melanoma in individuals with darker skin, is missed because a physician trusts the health AI cancer screening device that was primarily trained on white skin. And in some data sets, women are underrepresented, such as in data from clinical trials. And so a gender bias may occur when such data is used to train algorithms. And so it's really essential to diversify data to reflect different populations adequately to ensure fairness. And the lack of patient data of different geographies, races, gender, and also socioeconomic statuses may really create biases and thus likely prevent the most vulnerable patient groups from benefiting from new health AI-based products. And so it's really imperative that we start to develop and access new flagship data sets that are ethically sourced, trustworthy, well-defined, and accessible. And that's also a reason why I very much welcome NIH's new Bridge to AI initiative, which Dr. Matt and others are currently steering. But today's presentations have also shown us that bias is far more complex than it first appears, because there are so many different types of biases, such as bias in the training data, label choice bias, contextual bias, and also unconsciousness or implicit bias. So for example, I believe that the algorithmic bias playbook from Dr. Bemenik and colleagues really helps to define and measure and also mitigate racial bias in live algorithms. And I think similar initiatives that focus on other issues of AI, such as data privacy, are really needed to ensure ethical and trustworthy AI. As we have also seen today in the afternoon session with Dr. Halamka, Professor Maid, and also Dr. Temming, AI tools are currently being used in different ways, in ways that can support equity, and other times in ways that invite bias or increase disparities. And we have also heard, for example, that labeling may help for data transparency, and that we also need a new regulatory landscape for AI. I think that another big issue is access to healthcare. So if patients do not go to the doctors, we do not collect any data from such patients, and so we may exclude them from the onset. So there is a considerable risk that we only mirror the current disparities with AIs because our existing data sets are incomplete. And so how do we fix this problem? As we heard today by Professor Qasimi, synthetic data seems not to be a robust solution. And so we really do need initiatives to promote data collection from diverse and vulnerable patient communities, such as racial and ethnic minorities, to really ensure inclusion and equity so that AI will ultimately benefit all of us. We still have a long way to go, so we are just scratching at the surface, but we need to start these efforts really now to make AI and digital health really a success story. I am personally an optimist and believe in technology, but we can also only manage to realize this potential of AI if we work together in diverse teams that represent all of us. I stop here and look forward to the Q&A.
Wow, what an extraordinary set of reactions, really amazing. You both did a beautiful job. I'm going to now ask all of our presenters, reactors from different sessions to join, but I want to turn first to Lene and Sarah with a question, sort of a reflection, Sarah, back on your question. Who is accountable for assuring that AI solutions are equitable and promote the vision that Sarah has talked about of not just making sure they're equitable, but really actively work to reduce disparities?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I think it's all of us, like all kind of stakeholders. And I think that's really important. It's not only, not only the regulators and the FDA, because there's so many AI products on the market that are not even regulated by the FDA. And so I think it's also the companies, the data scientists, the entire, everyone who is developing AI can also develop like standards internally to make sure that we adhere to these high ethical standards. So I think it's all of us, all kind of stakeholders, from the data scientists to even the patient representatives to physicians, regulators, ethicists, lawyers. We all need to come together and try to solve it together, because it is AI is a very complex issue, and I think we need all brilliant minds to tackle those issues.
Terrific. Lene? Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with Sarah's comments. And I guess, one of the challenges I would say is I think there are many stakeholder communities out there that don't know that they're a stakeholder community because they just don't realize, that they're interacting with AI or that their data is being used in such a way. And so I think there is still a huge transparency and education hurdle that we need to get over just to get to that level of recognition so that people know to be engaged in evaluating these models and algorithms.
I wonder, and I'm welcoming any other perspectives on this, because it really does get to the question of not only who has the power, but how do we hold the powerful accountable? And the issue of standards, you both have described. Any other perspectives on how do we hold people accountable to make sure that they are focused on achieving equitable solutions?
And Darcy, I would like to comment. I would say that in the business community, we've noticed that when the business is interested in its own survival, they get together and they do create standards and solve solutions for the industry. And they have the money, the power, and the influence to do that, and they do get together. I think when these business sector are getting infusion of government funds, like is going to happen now with the tsunami of funding coming out from the ARP Act and other philanthropic and business communities pouring money into addressing inequities. I think that the requirement must be to receive these funds that these businesses, which have so much power and influence, be required to both participate and evaluate that they have meaningful participation. And there are principles that can be applied to assess what is meaningful and what is not already in the nonprofit and community-based sector that we have worked with among ourselves. The other thing is that there is something called shared savings that should be a principle when businesses are leveraging data and information from community and using it for profit. They should be in managed care and the government-funded healthcare system. It is something that is being used where the health reform is requiring the savings from the improving healthcare that the community-based health centers and others contribute to be shared with them. So models are available. What it needs is the political will and the willingness of the private sector to commit to moving the dial on health by working in partnership with the community-based sector so that we all profit together. Because right now, the profit motive that has driven the American system into high cost and disarray is something that if it continues, we will grind to an expensive halt.
Terrific. Please don't hesitate to raise your hand if you'd like to join in this, because I think this is a central part of our conversation.
And I would just add more specifically there that it is absolutely critical that a percentage of the dollars coming in are tied to contractual engagements with community-based organizations. That is how the shift began to happen in the business world, when a certain percentage was required in order for you to receive funding for your construction project, in order for you to receive grant dollars, in order for you to receive corporate dollars. When that percentage is tied, that holds these large organizations accountable. And I think it's absolutely critical that a percentage of the dollars coming in is required to go out in contracts to community-based organizations, because we know it is a fact, and every presenter has said it, they have to go back to the community to get the real data. And in order to do that, you have to utilize nonprofit resources.
So many of you have focused on the issue of trust and how central trust is to both obtain the data and then obviously to maximize its use to reduce or minimize or mitigate bias, et cetera. And I'm wondering if you could reflect on what are the opportunities to promote communities' better understanding of these issues, to promote the kind of health literacy that's central for them to understand why they might want to contribute, under what conditions, data about their health, et cetera. So can you reflect a little bit on, we know how central and important it is, but what are some of the ways in which we can engender trust among the people, among the various stakeholders, not communities being a central one, but among the various stakeholders, that this is all important for us as a public to achieve health for all? Amy.
I think that central to any relationship is listening. And so when you say, how do we make them understand? I think that, like, in the end, really what it needs to be is, how do we understand what it is that their needs and wants are? And how does this solve any of those needs or wants for them? Because I think that having a conversation with listening first is how you build trust. And that's actually how you move forward in any relationship and in any sort of thing. So I think thinking about, how is AI going to augment relationships? You have to start with listening and saying, like, what is first needed? And I think that's key and critical for any movement forward, is to listen first.
Thank you for that reminder. I totally concur with that perspective. It's central. It's central. Ngozi? Sorry, I see a hand up, so I'm not sure if you.
I am here. Yes. I wanted to piggyback on what Lebo Moses said about requiring a percentage, and I wanted to use a direct example from the state of New York and the DSRIP funding. When there was a mention in the DSRIP health reform funding that community-based organization must be engaged in the remodeling of care, and that there was a mention about up to 5% of the allocations that the major medical health systems receive should go to community-based organizations. Less than 1% of the money from any major institution went to community-based organizations, because it said up to 5%. And in some cases, it was 0. And the community-based organizations were always at the table. They came to us because we felt that somewhere along the process, people would wake up and see our value. Now a new model of DSRIP is being applied for in New York State. And they've learned the lesson that after 5 years, some things change, but not enough change, because community-based organizations remained on the fringes. And even the technology in the collection of data was not sufficiently intuitive to help. So now the New York State Department of Health is remodeling how it looks at the engagement of community-based organizations. And it sought input from community-based partners to reframe the paradigm for how it might work better. And I think that is exactly the kind of leadership we need from the business community and from state, to actually learn from the lesson that has got us in the mess we're in, reach out to the community and engage them in these meaningful and adequately compensated, time compensated discussions, because we are paid to do services. And when we rob those services of the time to participate at these tables where we may not be taken seriously, we may be taken seriously, the delivery of service suffers. And we have people always banging on our door, waiting to be served. We have to make the decision, do we serve or do we collaborate here and then hope that something happens? So there are models in New York State and perhaps in other states that can be borrowed. We don't need to create the wheel. We need to just strengthen, find what is working and strengthen it and use it again. And I'm not one for starting over, but building on.
That's fabulous. Ngozi, you have started what I'm hoping we can continue this conversation about a rational path forward to achieve equity in the use of AI health-related tools. And now I'm going to be asking each one of you to kind of in a round robin, Reed at the beginning of this said, we need to be talking about action, a path forward for action. So to think about what step or steps, action steps, do you recommend in helping us to move from where we are? Ngozi just gave a great example. Look at existing models that have led to the kind of engagement with communities, tying this to reimbursement. So what are the action steps that you would recommend in order to advance this agenda, accelerate our advancement in this agenda going forward? So I'm going to call on Amy.
Great, thanks. I think putting into implementation internally in this group, what we've talked about, a governance structure for thinking about NAM that is more diverse and representative of those who we're trying to make sure that we're reaching out, and what the AI tools are supposed to like impact to improve equity. So who are the people that receive inequitable care right now, and how do they see that? So making sure that they're sitting at the table in a leadership position and in a decision-making capacity position, I think would be my first and my most important recommendation. And then thinking about meeting people where they are.
Yeah.
So I think I said listening, but I think also listening and then making sure you're meeting them where they are to start on whatever journey they're on, rather than like saying, oh, I'm listening and I hear you're here, but I want you here, so I'm going to start here. So meeting people where they are.
That's fabulous. So our other Amy.
Thank you. I think not making assumptions. I think many of us who've been doing the work we're doing for a long time, no matter what seat we're sitting in. And I think we think we may understand the other side of care in ways we may not. We may not understand the budget restrictions. We may not understand the technology restrictions. We may not understand some of the language. And I think a little more listening and questioning our own assumptions, I think would be valuable. It's a little esoteric, but I think it's an important piece.
Thank you. So Sarah, thoughts?
Well, yeah, so I would say, first of all, we need to establish like a really diverse and representative stakeholder network where everyone is kind of representative. And then, of course, we need to break down the data silos. We need to start to develop these new data sets, but that needs to be checked on by like everyone, like a representative group, because otherwise we again try to do something, but we fail in doing something good. I also believe we need to be doing a lot better job in educating patients and communities. So we need to develop educational materials. It's very, very important, this health literacy, because I think we can only ensure trust if we promote technology and explain it to them, and not hiding technology, but being frank about what are we going to develop, where do we have limitations